might I take a moment to introduce our intrepid and illustrious moderators today, Chris Kaminsky and Crandall. Crandall Rogers, I will pass it over to both of them to guide us in this conversation today. There will be a live question and answer at the end of today's conversation. So please feel free to drop your questions in the question box or in the chat if you prefer, but we'd love if you put them in the question box. Crandall, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Tressa. Appreciate you and everybody here today. I'm Chris Kaminsky with ECE Touring, and I'm on the board of NAPAMA. And just want to go over what our agenda is going to be today very quickly. We're going to talk about what is accessibility. We're going to have some examples of real-life audio accessibility, real-life visual accessibility. We're going to go over some technical nuts and bolts. And then at the end, we'll sort of synthesize that conversation and have the Q&A. And so we thank you for being here and hope you enjoy. Crandall? You need to unmute, Crandall.
Okay, there we go. Welcome to everybody. Thank you to all of our panelists. We have an amazing panel today with just an incredible amount of information to share with you. And thank you to everybody at Folk Alliance for their help. And of course, thank you to our ASL interpreters and our closed captioning interpreter. So our first speaker, who's going to kick us off, is Celia Hughes. She is the Executive Artistic Director of ArtSpark in Texas, and she has been developing and implementing arts programming that is inclusive for all since 1999. So Celia, if you want to start out and take us into what is accessibility.
Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. I'm delighted that you're all here and really happy to be on this panel with all these wonderful people. As Crandall said, I've been working in the arts with people with disabilities pretty much my whole life. And in 1996 in Texas, we started offering audio description. So we've been doing audio description ever since 1996. I want to say that in 2000 was my first integrated theater experience. I brought together a group of individuals to devise a theater piece. And it was comprised of two ladies who were blind, a person who was deaf, 3 people in wheelchairs, a person with traumatic brain injury. We had a very wide variety of people that came together. And that was my first real introduction into what is accessibility. It really isn't just about making things accessible to people with disabilities, but it's making things accessible to everyone. And I believe there's a slide. Yep, there we go. So what we're going to talk about today is how access is about creating equitable and equivalent experiences. We can't possibly begin to think that by providing access that we're going to create an equal experience, because I can't ever recreate a hearing experience for someone who cannot hear or a visual experience for someone who cannot see, but I can really work very hard to create an equitable and equivalent experience. And so what we're going to talk about is how do we increase inclusion in audiences through this virtual world by really beginning to think about all of the visual information that we put up online and all the auditory information we put up online, and how this new world has really made it even more noticeable that this information really is not available to a large percentage of the people across the country and around the world. And so what defines good accessibility? Well, oftentimes I'm sure you go into the airport when we used to go to the airports and would see captioning up on the screen of the TV in the restaurant, or captioning around, and sometimes it's really inaccurate captioning, and you know, and sometimes it's pretty accurate, and a lot of that depends on when the captioner gets the information and how their computer is programmed. But recently I saw a show where the captioning was an automatic generated caption. It was not by a real person, it was by a machine. And that was very obvious to me, because what would happen is that it would go along for a little while, and then the captioning would kick in, and the caption would zoom along at, you know, and I couldn't read any of it until it caught up with where it was with the speaker, and then it moved along. Well, that is not good accessibility. And people could go home and pat themselves on the back and say, oh, how wonderful we are. We did captioning. Well, no, you didn't do captioning. It wasn't accessible to anyone. No one could read it. And why do it if it's not going to be good, if it's not going to provide the service that you're trying to provide? And you've got the right intention. So it's learning the tools and really appreciating what it is that you have to do in order for it to be really good accessibility and to bring your audience back. So we've got three wonderful panelists, and they're going to talk about access services in this virtual environment, and they're going to talk about effective access practices that you can consider. We're going to do a little nuts and bolts, but we're really going to talk about what it is to be a person who is hard of hearing to try to access a Zoom call, what it is for a person who is blind or visually impaired to try to access a Zoom call where information is being presented on slides and not really being talked about, or what it is to be a person who has limited mobility or limited fine motor skills and can't really operate click here, click there, move your mouse here, who's trying to work through using speech to text technology, and how a lot of what we do can't be manipulated in that environment. So it's more than just deciding that you're going to provide access. It's really thinking about the end product. What is, you know, am I providing a good product at the end, or am I just throwing something together to say I did this? So you really have to think about what is the end product in order to get good accessibility. And we've got some people here today who are really going to be able to provide you with some of that wonderful information. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Celia. That's fantastic. Coming on with our next speaker is Tina Childress. She's an educational audiologist in the mainstream and residential school settings. As a late deafened adult with bilateral cochlear implants who's fluent in ASL, her areas of expertise include hearing, assistive technology, accessibility, especially in the performing arts. Tina, thank you so much for being here, and we'd love to hear what you have to tell our audience.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I confirm that you guys can see my slide on the screen right now? Okay, awesome. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I know that many of us are kind of wishing that we could be at, we could have been at LEAD last month, and so I hope you guys are staying safe. So let me talk about what it's like to be a deaf or hard of hearing person trying to navigate this virtual world. So a little bit about me. I am a lover of all things performing arts. I grew up very musical, did lots of shows. I think I kind of influenced my daughter because she's now a theater major, which is wonderful to see that whole process. I am a late deafened adult, so I lost my hearing when I was 29. And I now have bilateral cochlear implants, which allows me to hear. I am also fluent in ASL, so I'm grateful that I'm able to use a bunch of different tools in my toolbox to make access happen. The irony of it is I'm also an audiologist. I actually became an audiologist first, and then I lost my hearing, which is bizarre. But it's all good because I know about hearing loss. I am an advocate. when it comes to accessibility. You know, during these COVID times, a lot of people, you know, had some downtime, and I felt this weird urgency. I feel to educate people and to use my skills to help accessibility, because, you know, the Zoom thing and setting up meetings and using captioning and interpreters and how to arrange the windows is not something that's intuitive, and it wasn't mainstream yet. Of course, now we know that it's mainstream, and I actually see that as kind of a silver lining. I know that I've been able to see people on Zoom or other platforms that I probably would not have made contact with if not for the fact that we now have this infrastructure in place. So for me, that has been a silver lining. I will talk about things like how the consumer needs to let you know what works for them. Okay, I think that you guys have great intentions, but I think that sometimes people will offer these accommodations, but they're not the appropriate accommodations for what we need. And so I'll talk about that. So for example, I prefer captioning for musicals because I want to know every single word that the lyricist wrote. You know, I have seen the musical Wicked with interpreters, but when you're interpreting things like innuendo and outuendo, you know, it can get lost if you are, you know, someone that grew up with spoken language. And for me, like, I have to translate everything in my head too. But for like a straight play, I would prefer to have an ASL interpreter. So it really kind of depends on the situation. So these pictures that you see on the screen, one is a screenshot of an article that was written when I had kind of a disagreement with Fox Theater in St. Louis. I've been part of advocacy efforts on Broadway. Broadway Con, which if you don't know what it is, it's like Comic Con for geeks. And I've seen like Christina there and like Lisa Carling and people like that. And it was just wonderful. And, you know, I had to fight for access to get there. I've used captioning for a bunch of different shows. So let's talk about that. So, you know, we're using Zoom today, and Zoom is just one option that's out there for having some kind of live broadcast. There are other platforms like Facebook Live, YouTube Live. You can build your own website or, you know, hire a company that can broadcast things live. And with it comes their own little tweaks and ways that you have to integrate technology and integrate accommodations. And my suggestion for you is to plan way ahead. If you're not very familiar with how to provide accommodations, it can be a challenge. So of course we know the two ways, at least in this virtual world, for providing access. And we have both on this platform. And I really appreciate that Celia talked about the importance of using a live captioner versus automatic captioning, because that can be very important. So my suggestions for creating captions. So let's say you're going to have a performance, whether it be something like theater. I have a friend and colleague who is actually going to be presenting for the Folk Arts Festival for the Midwest region, and she wants to approach accommodations for people with hearing loss from the performer perspective. What if you're a performer that has hearing loss? So some things to think about. There are people that their job is to do theater captioning. Those are the people that have watched the show, that have looked at the script, that know how to do the timing, they download the script. So there are professional theater captioners that are available. There is the option of doing do-it-yourself captions. Matt Bivens, who created a program called Caption Point, has a wonderful website with awesome best practices in terms of things like how to set the font, what colors you should use, how many lines that you should have, and he has that all on his website. So I'm hoping that at the end of this, that this PowerPoint can be shared so that you can have this link to his website. one thing that happened for me, and I consider this kind of low tech, I went to see, oh, it was Great Comet on Broadway, and it was right when captioning was starting to happen, either open captioning. It was before we had the handheld captioning that's now available on Broadway. But actually what kind of worked for me was having the script. And so I don't know how they finagled this, but they sent me a PDF of the script and I watched it on my tablet. You know, I reversed the screen so that it was black with very light white lettering, so it wasn't, you know, very bright in the very dark theater. I stuck it on my phone on a selfie stick, and great comment, if you don't know this show, there's a lot of moving around. It's not just a stage, there's people behind you, and it actually worked to be able to pivot the selfie stick as I followed them around with the script. And then, of course, there's automated captions. So I always consider this last resort. If for whatever reason captioning is not able to happen and you get kind of stuck, this is an option, but understanding that it's not perfect, like Celia talked about. I think there's a time and a place for automated captioning, such as maybe more informal gatherings. I find it, as a late deafened person who does fairly well with my cochlear implants, I actually prefer to listen as much as I can, and then when I miss something, to look at the automated captions. Okay, so we'll talk about the comparison between the two. So in terms of where do you put the captioning? You know, what are your options? It is possible to put captioning at the bottom of the screen, like what you're experiencing right now. And for a virtual performance, I think that would be preferred. I mean, it's hard to kind of look at the performance and then look to the right or look way down or look on a different device in order to see the captions. So when possible, try to embed it into the bottom of the window. Always test before you commit to something like that, because there are times when the captioning is really delayed, and that's not going to be, you know, ideal for that situation, and you may need to tweak. I always ask captioners when, you know, I use them for other things, is do they have the ability to stream to a web browser? And so what that might mean is so like the two examples I have are Stream Text and OneCap app. And so let's say I have the Zoom window and I'm watching the captions and it's not good. It's really delayed. If that captioner is also sending it to an external browser window, I can read the captions like in a separate window on my computer on a separate screen, and typically those are more synchronous or more in time. In terms of ASL interpreters, in case you didn't know, and I think that a perfect example of this would be this meeting today, Zoom just came out with a really cool new feature. You have to download the newest version, which is 5.2.2, and it only works on a computer. Like, you can't do this if you're on a tablet or if you're on a smartphone. And what it allows you to do is to pin or spotlight up to 9 different people. So pinning, when you pin something, that only affects you. Okay, it only affects what you see on your computer, whereas if the host or the co-host spotlights someone, and those are the only 2 people that can, then it will affect everybody's view. So, you know, there have been times where it's been a little bit complicated to pin or multi-pin or make everybody turn off their camera. And this feature might be a good option. The difference in using this is that you actually have to see it in speaker view as opposed to gallery view. Okay, so it might look something like this. So what you see on the screen right now is kind of an example of what a Zoom screen might look like with a performance, what I'm calling the performance pane, or like the video of your production on the left. And then there's another window on the right-hand side of the screen at the top that represents an interpreter. And then a window right below that that says narrator. So that would be one way that you could get 2 people on screen. Of course, also, if you notice, there's the 2 vertical lines in between the panes, and you can move those left and right if you want to make the interpreters or the narrators bigger or smaller. So in terms of setting the scene for if you are going to be putting on a presentation or a talk or something like that. So for things like audibility, for things like speech to text, or for a live captioner to be able to be the most successful, you want to have the best audio signal. And the way to achieve that is to use some kind of mic. And so you could use a headset with a boom mic that's in front of your mouth. I am actually using a wireless Bluetooth mic that's about the size of my pinky that I have clipped to my shirt. And that's because my voice is only a few inches away from the microphone, so it's going to be louder and more robust and not as susceptible to things like background noise or echoey rooms or things like that, okay? The other thing is lighting. So right now I have a selfie light in front of me. You don't ever want lights behind you that will just give you a halo and also kind of darken your face as much as you can. Have a plain background. I think I'm doing my my rendition of what it's like to be a sign language interpreter with my black top and my black background. Camera angle, you don't want to see up my nose or see all 8 of my chins. So I always suggest that you have the camera either eye level or a little bit higher. And as a viewer, I like to have multiple devices. You should see my mission control. It's a little ridiculous right now. I have 5 screens on right now. But if you are moderating a panel or a webinar, always log in as the moderator, but you also want to log in as a participant, because you know sometimes when you share your screen, you don't always know what the other people see. Okay, and I know I already asked that when I started, but that's because one of my things just shut down. So I always recommend that. Whoops. So I'm going to end with some resources. So I love to make lists. I love to gather information and categorize it and then make some kind of resource. So I realized that I had stuff kind of all over the place. So I ended up making a list of my lists. And that's what that previous slide with the link showed you. And so I have lots of information and tutorials on things like speech to text options, how to caption a video conference, how to add captioning to videos, kind of post-production, do it yourself. So I hope you find that helpful, and I'm going to turn it over to the next person.
Thank you very much. That was a ton of information, and I'm really glad you did that resource sheet. We're going to move on next now with Kim Charlson, who does have her buddy you see in the picture with her, but he's asleep under the desk. And she is the executive director for the Braille and Talking Book Library at the Perkins School for the Blind, and is a recognized expert on library services and assistant technology and information access for people with accessibility issues. So Kim, if you want to take your part away, go to it.
Thank you. I do have to apologize if you hear some kind of growling noise in the background. There seems to be some grounds work outside that I have no control over. You know, they're grinding up a tree or something. So hopefully we won't have too much intrusion from that, but I have no control over that. So, well, back in March, I think all of our lives changed when pandemic came into the world, and things dramatically changed for avid consumers like Tina and myself, who are just avid users of and attendees of performing arts activities. I love performing arts and am a staunch advocate for audio description, which is the accessibility tool that people who are blind or visually impaired use to gain equivalent access to performing arts, and other cultural access venues and activities. So I assuming, but I don't like to assume, that most people know what audio description is, but I'll just briefly say that it is someone who is using descriptive language to convey to the listener, i.e. a person who is blind or visually impaired, what is happening visually on the screen or the stage, to make it possible for the blind person to understand and know the key visual elements on the performance so that they can follow along. It's meant to be objective so that the viewer or the audience member who is blind can interpret just like other audience members interpret and come to their own conclusions about what the playwright or the speaker or whatever the producer, director might have wanted the audience member to come out of the event knowing or understanding. So audio description is a fabulous tool that helps people who are blind to understand and participate in cultural activities. Since the cultural halls and the doors have been closed in reality, many organizations have turned to virtual access to some of their activities and worked to kind of reinvent themselves using tools like Zoom to continue to make some of their activities and events accessible and available to some of their audience members who have disabilities. And for the most part, that has been a great experience, particularly in the areas of music, musicians. That's an area where blind and visually impaired people don't need a lot of accommodation because it's engaged with listening. But when audio description's required, if there's performances, dance, comedy, acting, those kinds of things, you begin to require audio description to make those understandable or more enjoyable for audience members. My platform of preference, and I think the blind and visually impaired audience members' platform of preference, is Zoom. It tends to be the easiest for blind and visually impaired folks to use. It has a lot of accessibility built into it. Navigating through it is easier. We were talking earlier about possible enhancements to Zoom to make it possible in the future to potentially do audio description on a secondary audio channel that may be used now for Spanish translation or other language translations, which I think would be a fabulous thing. That's very new, very cutting edge. So if you hadn't heard about it, either had I until today. So that's something to certainly be explored in the area of Zoom. So online can be tricky. Facebook is another good source, Facebook Live, because things are fairly accessible there for the blind community. YouTube, somewhat, and you do have description available there. It's always good to potentially have some advisors in your pocket somewhere that you can consult with and ask questions, because more than one advisor who's blind or visually impaired is a good idea. I always tell people, don't just use my opinion as your baseline, because there's a lot of blind and visually impaired people out there, and there's a lot of non-blind and visually impaired people out there, and what we all have are opinions. So you have to sort through the opinions to get to what you decide you need to do to make your services and your programs work best. But it's really advisable to hear from more than one person about what might be the most advisable solution for accessibility, either online or in-house, whichever you're thinking of doing. So another area in my work, advocating, I do a lot of work in the marketing and outreach to the community. So one of the things I say is you can never tell the community enough times what you do and how you do it and how important it is, because it just always seems that every time you tell your story, you're going to capture a few more people who have never heard it before. And as many times as I do this and I tell the story over and over, I get people who say, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Why didn't I hear about it? And you just scratch your head and go, I've been telling this for years. I don't know how I missed you. But you just keep doing it because you have to keep doing it. You have to keep saying over and over again, you know, this is what we do, this is our service, and really partner with the community, partner with people who are blind and visually impaired. We have listservs, we have ways of communicating with each other. We call it the blind grapevine, and it works very well. And you want your message to be on that grapevine, because if it starts traveling on that grapevine, you're going to know, because people are going to start coming to your events. So connect with somebody, connect with me, connect with anybody. I have contacts all over the country, so I can put you in touch with people who can help you get the word out in your areas, on your events, to make to get the word out about your activities. That's one of the most important things that you can do. And never believe that you've told your story enough times, because there's just thousands of people out there who still haven't gotten the message. And we have to keep saying it over and over again. The other thing I do quite often for venues and organizations is consult with them about their flyer or their programs and how they can make their flyer or program more accessible for people to read. So I think that fonts, what fonts you use is hugely important to the readability of your documents. Try to produce your documents, your brochures in as large as font as you possibly can, at least 14 point if you can get up to 16. Remember to use contrast, so your text is darker against a high contrast. You want to create that contrast. Don't use, you know, light blue background with a pale blue lettering. It's going to fade away. Everybody's going to have trouble reading it. Layout and design that's easy to read. All of your older attendees to events are probably having some kind of issues reading things. You know, you've got your people whose arms are too short. You've got your people whose arms are too long. They have to get it right up to their face or far away. The bifocals come out, the glasses come on, they go off. Whatever their issue is, they have some challenges reading as well. So make your documents as easy for those people to read, and test it with some just general staff, your board, get some feedback from sighted folks about readability as well. Which one was easier? Give them a couple choices and see what they conclude in evaluating and analyzing your document as far as readability.
Okay, Kim, I need to say we have to
Thank you.
wrap up, but we may have time in the Q&A to talk more about those flyers, because that was actually a question that came in.
Perfect. And I think in the materials, my email address is going to be provided. So I'm happy to talk more directly with anybody who has specific questions about any kind of accessibility accommodations for the blind community for their specific organization. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. Appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge with us. Our next speaker is Christina Trevino, and she's the Director of Digital Strategy at TDF, which is Theater Development Fund out of New York City. She's going to cover some nuts and bolts information for us, and she's got over 10 years of experience working in the digital space and a lifetime of experience in accessibility. So we're so grateful that she's here. And Christina, take it away.
Sorry, I'm going to share my screen. but we're already sharing a screen. Well, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about accessibility before your main event, because accessibility shouldn't start right at your performance. People have to know about your event, and one way we can improve accessibility in that realm is have our websites be accessible. There's an organization called the World Wide Web Consortium. Their website is w3c.org, and they have laid out the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is just the 4 pillars of what makes your digital content accessible, that it's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. But it is a very detailed document. It has every little thing that you should do and tips on how to make it happen. And there are hierarchies of success. So you can do level A, level AA, and level AAA as you get more and more accessible with your website. It's something everyone should explore. And if you are in an organization that is having trouble getting the funding to make your products accessible, I want you all to know that making your websites and your emails accessible improve your Google search results. It improves your email deliverability, things that your marketing team is probably already invested in, even if they don't have an investment in accessibility. And that might be an angle that'll help you get that funding. Here's a tool. It's called the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. It's at wave.webaim.org. You can type in your website URL and get a quick overview of the accessibility of your existing website. It's not as good as getting a human review as most things we have discussed today are. It might tell you that something is inaccessible and be incorrect. It might tell you that something is accessible and not quite work for a human. But it is a good place to start to know how good or how bad your website is as is right now. So definitely check that out. Now, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines also apply to emails. So these are, I've highlighted here some numbers of specific guidelines that apply to emails. You'll want to be able to tab around with your email if you're not using a mouse. You'll want the information to follow a logical order as someone tabs around. You'll also want to have alt tags and title tags. You'll want to have a plain text version of your email. All of those things contribute to the accessibility of your email communications and their deliverability. If Google knows what it's about and it's able to read your content, it'll understand what you're talking about and it'll reach more inboxes. Now, maybe social media will be the next place that you promote your events. And on social media, this is a screenshot from Facebook. If you drop down to the options button on a graphic, you'll see a link to click change alt text. And there will be some pre-written information there. It probably won't be helpful. It'll be something like 3 people smiling. And that's probably not what you want your description to say. So it'll open a text box and you can just type in the correct information there that you'd like it to have. And similarly on Instagram, it has an edit alt text when you're on a graphic, and it'll open up a window for you to write in all of the entries. It won't be pre-written there for you. But here also, if you have a carousel of multiple images, it'll give you all of those alt text boxes at once. So you might want to take some notes before you open the alt text screen in that place. And here's Twitter, and Twitter, they call it description. You click add description and then you write in what you want people to know about that graphic. For captions, a technique that we often use is uploading a video first to YouTube, because YouTube tries to automatically caption a video. It might take an hour, it might take a day. They will probably be bad. So you need to go into your video details, down to this subtitles and CC for original video language menu. Click edit in Classic Studio. And you open it in the Classic Studio, and you'll get this screen that has your video in a frame, and it has all of the captions that it came up with on the side. There won't be grammar in it or anything like that. They won't have proper capitalization, but you just have to type it in, fix it up. And then they have these little boxes on the bottom that are the alignment of the captions. So you can drag them over if it's not aligned correctly. You can add a new one if you have too much text in one screen. And then when you're done with this and you're happy with it, you can download out an what's called an SRT file. And that file can be used on other places. So if you use Vimeo, if you use Facebook, you can take that file and upload it there, so you don't have to do it over and over again. Something that YouTube also does with your captions file is present it on the side as a transcript if the user knows how to turn them on. You hit the 3 dots on the bottom of video, you click open transcript. And the difference here is that people can read it without having to mind the time or play the video, so they can read it at their own pace. YouTube unfortunately doesn't have, or at least none that I have found, a built-in audio description feature. So people often make a second copy of their video to have an audio described version. There is a resource called UDescribe. It's for people crowdsourcing audio descriptions and learning how to do audio descriptions. So if you want to learn how to do it, that might be a place to test out your skills. And you can give it a go. I have not had great success with it, but I just wanted to mention that it's out there. Facebook, in the world of the pandemic, has actually released a bunch of new accessibility features. So now if you're doing a live on Facebook, it should be automatically captioned. Again, they're probably not going to be perfect, but that's not even the only feature they have, so that you can do an audio only mode. And of course, some of these things are rolling out to sort of bigger pages first. All of these features came out because all the mayors and governors were doing press conferences on social media. So those sort of channels wanted to be accessible and have reach the most number of people as possible, right? And if you're not doing a live and those features aren't turned on for you, if you go into your edit video, you have this subtitles and captions box over here, and you can upload that SRT file that you potentially got out of YouTube. If you're doing the same thing on Instagram, unfortunately, you can only use an SRT file on Instagram if it's an ad, because it's the same platform as Facebook. Facebook owns Instagram. If you want captions on your video on Instagram and it's not going to be an ad, you need to burn them into the video. We use Adobe Premiere because we have Adobe Premiere. There's a bunch of apps that do this too. Headliner app lets you do 5 for free a month. There's a watermark, but that's a trade-off if that's the best you can do. Some people don't know this. You can also do captions on Twitter because you can't do this in the timeline. It's not, I'm in the middle of posting and this is where I upload the captions. You have to actually go to studio.twitter.com and click on your video, and there you can upload the SRT file. So that's something a lot of people don't know about. Now at TDF, we're not always the content creators. We're a nonprofit that serves the arts industry, so we're often directing people to other people's videos, and if they aren't pre-captioned, we often direct people to use a platform like Web Captioner because it's free and our members don't have to pay for it. And it has some interesting features, like you can tell it when it's getting a word wrong, and you can change the font sizes, so it's got some custom features for a free product. It is probably going to get things wrong and is not as good as a real life person, but in that situation, we don't really have another option. We're directing people to watch content on their own time, in their own world, and it's not captioned, and this is the best we can do, is direct them to something that they can use whenever they'd like. For ASL, and if you're doing something like a YouTube video, you would do a picture-in-picture feature, which is available in most of your built-in computer video systems. I have a Mac, so iMovie has a picture-in-picture feature. Streaming on something like this is a screenshot of Zoom. You can assign a participant to type captions. You can say that you will type the captions, or you can copy the API token into a service that provides captions. You don't have to know what an API token is. It's just a little bit of code. You have to place it where you're supposed to place it on the service that you've hired. It's not very difficult. Another thing that people use for streaming is StreamYard and systems like this. These can, I think StreamYard lets you have about 6 speakers at the same time. Here I took a screenshot of myself ahead of this presentation. It's just a picture of me, and I'm sharing my screen in another window. And for this one, I was using Web Captioner because I just needed a picture of what it would look like. So you get Web Captioner in a small window, and you have it tossed on your screen as a window share. And then this is another program that a lot of people use for streaming. It's called OBS. It's freeware. You download it. And this one has an interesting feature where you can overlay a screen on top of your video. You can chroma key out the background. So if there's a point where someone isn't speaking, it goes away. You know, if you just have music playing or nothing happening, it's not a black screen overlaying your video. I think that was it. That was a lot. I'm sorry I spoke so fast, but it was a lot of information to get out to you guys.
Thank you, Christina. Appreciate you. And Crandall's going to introduce our next speaker.
Yep, and thank you, Christina. That was wonderful, and it was a lot of information. You're right, but there's a lot of information to cover here. So now we're going to get our wrap up, and we're going to get our wrap up from Betty Siegel, who is the Director of VSA and Accessibility at the Kennedy Center. And she is also an incredibly respected speaker on disability rights and compliance, and an incredible advocate for people with disabilities. So Betty, why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. I am so excited by all that we have heard so far today. And what I'm going to do really quickly is hit some of the high points that each person has mentioned. From Celia, what we heard was that equitable and equivalent experiences are what we are shooting for, and that we need to truly consider the diversity of people with disabilities in our community. We also have to be thoughtful, intentional, and value people with disabilities. And we value them by showing them that we've planned for their integrated and for them to be integrated and included in all of our work. We need to consider, with the same intensity that we consider our art, the quality of the experience we provide to our patrons with disabilities. From Tina, what I heard was that people with disabilities are not their labels. They are individuals whose preferences for access are specific to their needs, and that their needs may change given a specific situation. I thought Tina was very wise to remind us that we need to plan ahead. And this was repeated by several of our presenters. And then Tina went on to present us with, as did the next three presenters, an immense amount of very, very practical information to use when we're doing things online. From Kim, what I heard is the importance, the critical importance of consulting the disability community. Never, never do for people without involving people in the process. She reminded us that we need to partner with and connect with the disability community, and we need to check in with more than one advisor. I thought that was great that she said we all have a different opinion and we all have different solutions. And so be sure that you are checking with multiple people to get the best product out there. She also reminded us that we need to tell people again and again and again what we're doing. We cannot depend on their knowing, because we told them once that what we're doing is going to be accessible. From Christina, I heard that accessibility, it starts before the live event. It starts back with your website, and it includes your social media. And that we need to take that holistic approach to the way that we provide accessibility. Again, lots of practical solutions. I'm thrilled that Tessa has been reminding us that a lot of this information will be available online. So don't worry if you didn't catch the PowerPoint. Simply from me, and I want to stay within 3 minutes because I want to leave plenty of time for people to ask questions and for us to get some answers from this incredible panel of experts. But for me, what I want to remind you is, although I'm a lawyer, I am not your lawyer, but this issue is about human rights, civil rights, and those rights did not go away because we had a pandemic. This is about diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And as the arts and cultural community, I strongly, strongly believe that we have a higher obligation to ensure that every member of our community is represented and is included when we are doing performances and events. So if you have questions, I'd like to throw it back to our hosts, Chris and Crandall, to respond to some of those.
Betty, thank you so much for summing that all up for us. There were we could probably do 20 webinars on all of the things that were covered today. This is certainly, we're hitting the treetops in many respects, and I expect that NAPAMA, as well as our partner organizations within APAC, including Folk Arts Alliance, Arts Midwest, Western Arts, NCPC, APAP, will all touch upon the sessions such as these in the future. I know, I believe Folk Alliance Midwest region has a webinar coming up on the 18th, and Tressa can touch upon that again before we leave today. We have had some questions that came in advance of today's session, as well as a few things that have come while we've been here. And I wanted to get with Celia in particular about how artists as well as presenters can really reach out and make sure that what they're presenting in the dance or theater realm are equitable and inclusive, particularly to people with low vision or vision impairment. And we also had the same question specifically regarding people with autism and how to make dance and theater more inclusive to that audience. And Celia, I was wondering if you might be able to speak to that.
Sure. You know, of course, in this virtual environment, for dance in particular, it has added an extra complication because, you know, people are not together. They're dancing it alone in their houses. And one of the things that we have done is to really incorporate the medium, incorporate the Zoom or whatever platform you're using into the actual dance. Our choreographers and our instructors are actually now having people notice what, the square that they're in, notice what's outside of their room, and actually dance with the different elements and also dance within the square so that it becomes, the technology becomes your partner in this dance. And then also we've been successful in using breakout rooms so that people can come together and dance with each other through, just two people together in a breakout room, or, something like that. To say what, it's hard for dancers to do this, but some are very successful to say what you're doing as you're doing it, to talk about what it is, how you're moving, how you're feeling, what's happening within you as you're dancing. All of this is helpful not only to people who are blind or have low vision, but also to people who have autism or on the spectrum. They know, they have a better sense of where to look. They have a better sense of what to feel, how to integrate themselves into the situation. I've got a couple of dancers. I've got Silva Lackerman on my staff who would be happy to talk with anyone. If you would like to email me, I'm very happy to hook you up with anyone. I'll drop my my email into the chat box.
That sounds wonderful. And I'm sure people would appreciate that. And I think all of the panelists are probably going to get a lot of people reaching out to them after this. We have a question that came in. Maybe Betty might be a good person. Could be simple, could be complicated. Are there separate copyright implications for captioning song lyrics? when songs, when live performances are being performed? Do they have to do anything about captioning the lyrics for the song, licensing wise?
It is my current understanding that there are not specific copyright issues around that. As long as you aren't especially using them for separate from your video and selling them. So if you've got your accessibility requirements under federal law are going to mandate that you make those captions available. So you have to comply with that. And as long as you aren't taking the captioning, like if you go into Hamilton and you caption Hamilton and then you grab the captioning from Hamilton, you take it outside of Hamilton and you broadcast it, that's probably a copyright violation. But the captioning that's happening of the artistic event in the moment would not be, in my opinion. Always check with a good copyright lawyer.
Thank you, Betty. We had a few people ask if there was a way to provide audio description, ASL, and closed captioning within a single broadcast. And I was wondering if maybe Kim might be able to speak to that, and then maybe Tina can also speak to that as well.
I think that it absolutely is possible to do that. I think it takes, the expertise of someone who does the captioning and the ASL side of the equation to work on that side, and the audio description side as well. So you're not going to find one person who's going to be able to do all those things. It's probably, well, it is 3 different people, but I have attended performances where all of those things were happening. And I really am captioning among the general audience and how much they like it. It really speaks to just captioning on television and how the fact that the general public likes captioning on television so much that accelerated television captioning to the 100% of television being captioned now, that I wish there was an equivalent area where we could get the general public to like audio description so we could escalate that just as quickly as captioning happened. But it is doable, absolutely.
So this is Tina. My camera is not working. I may switch here. I'm going to see if I can switch to my FaceTime. All right, and you can see I'm like the wizard behind the curtain here. So I posted a link, I think, in the chat that talked about the fact that you can get another channel like you would use for someone doing a different language. Like I saw that Zoom has that ability. So obviously, we can do Zoom with an ASL interpreter and captioning at the same time. So to get that audio description, I would investigate that separate language channel that is possible. Sometimes you have to purchase that as an add-on to Zoom if you don't have like the right tier of Zoom, but I think it's possible.
Thank you very much for that answer. Teresa, where are we on time? I'm not sure if we're needing to wrap up or if we have time for one more question.
It's me. Hi.
Hey.
We just have about 8 more minutes, 7 more minutes.
Okay.
We probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Thank you for asking.
I do have another question that came in on the chat box, which is interesting. It is from a company who specializes in artists, performers with disabilities, inclusion, diversity, and LGBTQ. And they're waiting on funding to produce ASL for their promo video and study guides in Braille. But they're asking if, given that funds are limited now for people, are there other things that they should be doing that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, but that will make can make a difference for their study guides and for their handouts and their things that go with their performances.
This is Betty. I'm gonna take this question because I think it has a lot of very complex issues involved in it. So number one, keep in mind that our values for accessibility are oftentimes expressed in our budgets. How and where we're putting our resources, our staff time and our money. So when you're talking about how you're going to include the disability community, go back to your budget and think really deeply about where you're prioritizing the services that you provide. So if you are going to represent or put yourself out there as being an inclusive cultural institution and you're reaching and representing the entire disability community, then I would make all those access services very high priority in your budget and in your in the way you express your programming through your dollars. But there are always different ways to adjust and modify. I would definitely take Kim's advice and go back to your local community. So start local, go to your disability community locally and ask them, invite a wide range of people to come in as an advisory group to help you prioritize those things that you're going to do. Because you might find that they'd rather have the ASL interpreters, and maybe the Braille study guides could be executed as plain text that you put on your website if your website's accessible, so that the person who's blind can access that content by using their own screen reader and their own personal technology. So, but if you've got a large blind community that use Braille and you have a very tiny ASL using community, then your priorities may slightly shift. This is what you have to, this is where the planning part has to really come into play. So it's not that one community's needs are more important than the other. What's important is what your community's needs are. And that'll help guide you in this question.
Thank you, Betty. We also received a question wondering if there was such a thing as automated sign language for virtual meetings. And I'm wondering if Tina might be able to answer that question for us.
Right. So no, there is nothing like an automated ASL interpreter for listening. And kind of going along with what Betty was talking about, we actually kind of had an off conversation about this, about do you provide both all the time or all three all the time? And I really like the way that Betty kind of helped me remember that, like in Chicago, what they do is they set certain days for certain accommodations. There might be an ASL interpreted performance, an open caption performance, an audio described performance. And then, like me as a person with a disability, I will look at my calendar and I will try to fit that schedule. Now, the other thing to consider is, let's say that I try and no matter what, I can't go to that day. Please be open to being flexible and providing an additional day. And I think that's what's most important, and that's going to go a really, really long way. And again, ask people what they want. Don't assume that they all want ASL or they all want captioning. Okay.
Thank you. And Tress, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much to everyone who was on today's call, from Sharon and Amber, who were providing the ASL interpretation, to Gloria, who was providing our captioning, to Chris Kaminsky and Crandall Rogers representing NAPAMA, and Celia Hughes from ArtSpark, Texas. And oh man, there's so many names. Christina Trevino. I really hope that I'm saying that right, Christina. And Celia Hughes, Tina Childress, Betty Siegel, Kim Charlson. What a panel this has been, and how much learning we have done. We'd also really like to thank, on behalf of Folk Alliance International and NAPAMA, all of our attendees who are here today, still in person, or who may watch this in the future, for your patience as we onboard into our own improvement of accessibility in our web offerings. It's been a real honor and opportunity to work with this fine group of humans. This webinar will be made available as a recording on the Folk Alliance YouTube channel, so please do take a moment to provide any feedback when you see the survey as your window closes, and suggest future topics or deeper dives into accessibility or other topics of interest to you. In this moment and in this movement, stay connected, stay calm, stay safe, stay in community, everyone, and we will see you next time. Thank you all, and goodbye.